Very warm welcome to Amishakil 5858. I am Ahmed Shackle. Following are the latest news headlines which have been reported by American, European, Canadian, Asian, African and Australian news channels and all other news agencies. So please, let's go to the news.
Tonight, breaking news as we come on the air from right here in the Vatican. The dramatic scene playing out just moments ago behind us, inside St. Peter's Basilica. The closing of the coffin, the farewell. Tonight, breaking news as we come on the air from right here in the Vatican. The dramatic scene playing out just moments ago behind us, inside St. Peter's Basilica. The closing of the coffin, the farewell to Pope Francis, and you'll see it. Also breaking tonight in the U.S., the FBI arresting a judge. Authorities accusing her of helping a migrant evade arrest. And we're tracking severe storms tonight across multiple states. First tonight, the world getting its final look at Pope Francis, lying in state at St. Peter's Basilica. And just moments ago, that dramatic and somber moment. The Pope's face covered in a white veil. His wooden coffin closed ahead of his funeral service, now just hours away here. Tens of thousands expected here for tomorrow morning's Mass and lining the streets of Rome. We'll take you into St. Peter's Square, where I spoke with Americans who were among the last ones allowed into the Basilica to pay their respects and what moved them most. Also this Friday night, the Trump administration signaling a major escalation in its deportation efforts. The FBI now arresting an American judge, accusing her of helping an undocumented immigrant in her courtroom evade authorities. They say she helped the migrant get out the door. Tonight, President Trump's tariffs and what he said late today about his 145% tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the U.S. Tonight, the president telling Time magazine he would not call President Xi first, but that President Xi has reached out to him. And President Trump now claiming to have made 200 trade deals already, but the White House providing no proof tonight. And this evening, as the president nears 100 days in office, the new ABC News poll just out tonight and what it reveals. In New York City tonight, the bombshell in the CEO murder case, suspect Luigi Mangione in court, and prosecutors telling the judge what they inadvertently did. In Boston, jurors in the Karen Reed murder trial taken to the scene where her Boston police officer boyfriend was found. Her defense team claims she was framed. The new images just in tonight, the police video showing the wife of the bassist from the band Weezer in a shootout with police. What police say the video reveals. Multiple wildfires breaking out in the Northeast, firefighters driving through the flames. Tonight here, night 2 of the NFL Draft Live right here on ABC. Number 1 pick Cam Ward going in Tennessee. And the surprising star who is yet to be drafted. And Pope Francis, the funeral final preparations right here behind me tonight. We'll carry it live at 3:30 in the morning tomorrow morning. And we'll take you right down to St. Peter's Square right here tonight.
From ABC News, this is ABC World News Tonight with David York, reporting tonight from the Vatican.
And good evening tonight from the Vatican, where we are.
But tonight, we want to go back to this stunning story that is unfolding live, and we're getting more information on this judge in Wisconsin who was arrested by the FBI today because they say she tried to help a domestic violence suspect get his way out of the courtroom as they were about ready to begin procedures because she thought she was aware that there were federal agents in the building that were looking for him. So she spirited him out a side door, according to the filing from the FBI. This is Judge Dugan that you're looking at next to a bust of Abraham Lincoln here. So also, a former judge and his wife were arrested in New Mexico. They were accused of letting a suspected Tren de Aragua member live in their guest house after he did some work on their home. So with that, we bring in another sort of perspective on this story. We've talked the legal side of it, some of the political side, but let's bring in Ron Vitiello, Senior Advisor to the Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection and former acting ICE Director. So Ron, you have a background as an agent for ICE. If you went into this courtroom because you understood that this person was going to be in the building and this is someone that you're looking for, how would all of this have played out in your mind, and how shocked would you be if the judge let this person out the side door?
Well, this is an activity that the agents engage in, right? They make a plan, maybe they do some surveillance, they're aware of the court docket. They probably know that some judges and maybe the defense attorneys, other people in the courtroom would be resistant to their presence. But I don't think you could imagine that the actual judge in the trial would do things like this, let the guy out the back door. She's good. She's a judge. She's supposed to be a leader, a pillar in the community, somebody that the constituency there in Milwaukee goes to as a trier of fact, right? She's supposed to be above. Her standard for law enforcement should be above, like the normal person. But no, these agents show up and she berates them while she's letting this guy out the back door. So now she's going to go down infamously in history as someone who skirted the law and thought she was above the law. This is a crime. The FBI is going to charge her for lying to federal agents. They ought to charge her for aiding and abetting a criminal illegal alien in the country. The Wisconsin bar ought to revoke her license to practice ever again in her life. She deserves our scorn.
Tonight, the rare move as a judge is arrested by the FBI. Circuit Court Judge Hannah Dugan accused of trying to help an undocumented immigrant avoid arrest by federal authorities. The judge swept up by the FBI outside her courthouse where protests quickly erupted. The DOJ's case against her and what she's saying as top Democrats blast the move will have the fallout tonight. The casket of Pope Francis sealed ahead of his funeral, now just hours away. President Trump and dozens of world leaders in Rome where security measures are at the highest levels. Tom Yamas from the Vatican tonight. The reports of chaos surrounding Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, his alleged threat to polygraph a top military officer, and the officials saying he has become erratic. The Moscow car bomb that killed the top Russian commander. The bombing coming just as a U.S. Special Envoy meets with Vladimir Putin. Trade war warning. Is there a risk of a repeat of COVID-era supply chain shortages because of President Trump's tariff fight with China? Luigi Mangione arraigned in federal court inside the rare federal death penalty case. George Santos sentenced, the former congressman now facing years in prison. And the Pope's impact, what he told an 8-year-old boy about his father and heaven.
This is NBC Nightly News with...
On this Friday night, a mistrial declared in a high-profile criminal case. While the sexual assault trial of 5 former World Junior hockey players, it's really incredibly unfortunate for everyone, starts all over again with a brand new jury. The final push for votes.
I was afraid to have to buy flowers for the funeral at the party.
With the Liberals and NDP in Ontario and the Conservatives out west. A Russian general killed in a bombing near Moscow as Donald Trump's special envoy is at the Kremlin for peace talks. And the pilgrimage for a final farewell. Dignitaries and the faithful arrive in Rome for the funeral of Pope Francis on Saturday.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Colleen Christie.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with a stunning development at the sexual assault trial of 5 former World Junior hockey players. The judge in a London, Ontario courtroom declared a mistrial this morning and the jury was released. Global National's Jeff Semple.
The end of a papacy. Francis's coffin is sealed and prepared for his funeral.
From CBS News headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Evening News.
Good evening to you in the United States. I'm John Dickerson in Rome, where it's early Saturday morning. In just a few hours at 10 a.m. local time, the funeral for Pope Francis will begin outside St. Peter's Basilica. The square will be filled with mourners from around the world, including President and Mrs. Trump. The public viewing of the Pope ended Friday evening. The coffin was sealed and the doors to the Basilica were closed. We will have much more about this later in the broadcast, but first, Maurice Dubois is in New York, and he starts us off tonight. Good evening, Maurice.
Okay, John, thank you so much, and we will see you shortly. The Trump administration's clashes with the courts reached a whole new level today with the arrest of a judge. The FBI took a county court judge in Milwaukee into custody, accusing her of helping a man evade immigration authorities. Lilia Luciano has the story.
According to the allegations and court documents, Judge Hannah Dugan helped Eduardo Flores Ruiz evade immigration agents waiting outside her courtroom. Flores Ruiz was accused of domestic battery. He was also undocumented. The complaint says the judge was heard calling the agent's arrival absurd and escorted Flores Ruiz through a jury door to avoid his arrest. Flores Ruiz was apprehended a short time later. Dugan was taken into custody this morning. Attorney General Pam Bondi said no one is above the law.
You cannot obstruct a criminal case, and really shame on her It was a domestic violence case of all cases, and she's protecting a criminal defendant over victims of crime.
We spoke.
Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz. Jeff Bennett is away. On the NewsHour tonight, the FBI charges a sitting judge with obstruction for allegedly helping an undocumented immigrant avoid arrest. World leaders converge on the Vatican for the funeral of the late Pope Francis as the faithful continue to pay their respects. And the head of the World Food Program speaks out about the challenges the agency faces as Israel blocks aid to Gaza.
People are starving, and many more are going to starve as a result of this. We need to be able to not only have a ceasefire, but be able to get in at scale.
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Gaza, Israeli attacks have killed more than 60 people since early Thursday, bringing the death toll since Israel shattered a ceasefire agreement last month to nearly 2,000. Among the recent dead are a family of 5, a pregnant mother, a father, and their 3 children, who were killed by an Israeli drone strike on their tent in the southern Gaza Strip. Another strike early Thursday collapsed a home in Gaza City, killing a Palestinian former prisoner and his entire family.
Hello, welcome back to Daybreak here on France 24. My name is Peter O'Brien, and day has broken over the Vatican, where a big day today will see the funeral of Pope Francis, breaking tradition until the very end. He will be laid to rest this Saturday. The gates of St. Peter's Square, as you can see here, already open to the public. They'll be joined by dignitaries and cardinals for a grand funeral mass. US President Donald Trump makes the first foreign trip of his second term for the funeral, saying he could meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, but is unsure whether Zelensky will make it to the funeral after a deadly Russian strike on Kyiv. And in other news, federal agents arrest an American judge for allegedly shielding an undocumented migrant, an escalation in President Trump's fight with the justice system.
Hello, a very good morning. It's 6 o'clock. Coming up on the programme today, the Vatican prepares for the funeral of Pope Francis. It's Saturday, the 26th of April. The ceremony begins at 9 a.m. in Vatican City before a funeral procession through Rome to his final resting place. Some 200,000 people are expected to attend the service outside St. Peter's Basilica. Amongst them, world leaders who've arrived in Rome, including President Trump and Sir Keir Starmer. Around 250,000 people have already paid their respects at the coffin of the late pontiff, now sealed ahead of the ceremony. Also today, Virginia Giuffre, who accused Prince Andrew of sexual assault, has died aged 41. Hello, very good morning. Thanks for joining us here on The Breakfast Show. In 3 hours' time, the funeral of Pope Francis will begin at the Vatican. We'll have full coverage throughout the morning, of course. But first, our top story this morning, Virginia Giuffre, the woman who accused Prince Andrew of sexual assault, has died at the age of 41. In a statement given to our US partner NBC News, Ms. Giuffre's family said she took her own life. They said, "It is with utterly broken hearts that we announce that Virginia passed away last night at her farm in Western Australia. She lost her life to suicide after being a lifelong victim of sexual abuse and sex trafficking." They go on to say, Virginia was a fierce warrior in the fight against sexual abuse and sex trafficking. She was the light that lifted so many survivors. In the end, the toll of abuse is so heavy that it became unbearable for Virginia to handle its weight. Let's bring in Matthew Thompson now. Hello to you, Matthew. Remind us who Virginia Giuffre was and what we've learned then about her.
Of course. Well, look, Ms. Giuffre was perhaps the most high profile of the accusers of Jeffrey Epstein, the financier, billionaire, and convicted paedophile. But perhaps in the UK context, she was most well known for also having made allegations against Prince Andrew, who she said she was introduced to via Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's, I suppose, henchwoman in some ways, who was also convicted of sex offences. Prince Andrew, we should say, has always strenuously denied any of those accusations against him. They settled out of court in 2022, but the settlements contained absolutely no admission of guilt of any kind on Prince Andrew's part. But she had been a campaigner against sexual abuse. She says that she met Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein in the early 2000s and was trafficked by him around the world when she was just a teenager. And then in later years, she was an American, but in later years had moved to Australia, where she had married, had children. She'd started a charity helping other victims of abuse. But in recent weeks and months, it had been reported that she had become estranged from her family, her husband certainly. And you may remember a few weeks ago, she published a widely shared post on Instagram saying she'd been in a car accident and had days to live. And then there was some aspersions cast on that by the local police force, who seemed to say that the accident hadn't been that serious. And then, of course, here we are 3 weeks later, the tragic news that she's been found dead at her farm at the age of 41. Police have been to the accident hadn't been that saying she'd been in a car accident and had days to live. And then there was some aspersions cast on that by the local police force, who seemed to say that the accident hadn't been that serious. And then, of course, here we are 3 weeks later, the tragic news that she's been found dead at her farm at the age of 41. Police have been to the address, they've investigated. They say they found a 41-year-old woman unresponsive. They're not treating it as suspicious.
Pope Francis's coffin sealed ahead of his state funeral in St. Peter's Square later today. Virginia Giuffre, a prominent survivor of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse, dies aged 41. Hundreds have gathered to pay tribute to the 18-year-old who was shot and killed in a car park in Newcastle. And a miniature sausage dog missing for almost 18 months on Kangaroo Island is found safe and well. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Melissa McKay. The eyes of the world are once again turning to the Vatican as preparations for Pope Francis's funeral take place. Public viewings have now ended and world leaders are arriving in Rome. Emma Rebellato is at the Vatican.
This is Asia Now.
It's 12 p.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 9:30 in New Delhi, and 11 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Rani Samtani. At this hour, India vows stern action against the perpetrators of the deadly terror attack in the Kashmir region. A federal minister says the government will ensure not a single drop of water flows from the country into Pakistan. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Russian leader Vladimir Putin discussed the possibility of direct talks between Moscow and Kyiv to end their years-long conflict. Volodymyr Zelensky says Crimea belongs to Ukraine after President Donald Trump suggests otherwise. Also ahead, Pope Francis's coffin sealed after more than 250,000 people pay their respects. Security in Rome and the Vatican ramped up ahead of today's funeral for the late pontiff. The Indian government is doubling down on its measures against Pakistan in the wake of a deadly terror attack that killed 26 people in the Kashmir region. The Water Resources Minister saying New Delhi will ensure not a single drop of water goes to Pakistan. The remark comes after India put on hold the critical Indus Waters Treaty, and Pakistan said any attempt to stop or divert the water will be viewed as an act of war. India's army chief visited the Kashmir Valley yesterday to conduct a security review, meeting senior military officers and the region's lieutenant governor. A giant manhunt is underway for the gunmen who carried out the attack. Authorities have blown up some family homes of suspected militants. The government claims cross-border links to the attack, but hasn't publicly provided any proof to back that claim. Pakistan's Senate has passed a resolution rejecting India's assertion that the country is behind the terror attack.
Africa News. The news.
Donald Trump and his wife are some of the dignitaries expected for Pope Francis's funeral on Saturday. The U.S. president departed Washington Friday for Rome. Over 100 delegations are already in the Italian capital to pay respects to the late leader of the Catholic Church. Also expected are top European leaders, including European Commission President, French President Emmanuel Macron, and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Around 250,000 people paid their respects before the Pope's coffin, according to the Vatican.
The United Nations Economic and Social Council held a special meeting in New York this week focused on forced displacement and refugee protection. With over 122 million people displaced globally, almost 44 million refugees, the world is facing an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. At the same time, international funding is shrinking, leaving millions without access to essential assistance. UN officials and global partners emphasized the need for long-term strategies to place missions.
If individuals, in this case females, join forces, they basically gain power, right? In our case, females, by forming coalitions, they gain power. Over males, they can gain dominance within their group, and they can attain, very high-ranking positions within the group.
It's rare for such a strategy to allow females to gain dominance in the animal world. After 3 decades of observing bonobos in their native Congo, scientists say that when the females band together, they're able to turn the tide against more violence. This sort of sisterhood is regularly put on full display during ovulation.
We know that around the time of ovulation, in chimpanzee, basically females get beaten on, right? It's a common pattern, male sexual violence around the time of ovulation. In bonobos, we actually observe the opposite, that they receive less aggression from males, win more conflicts against males, so they somehow gain leverage, right, due to the fact that they are close to ovulation. So we knew that that is a source of female power, right, the leverage they gain.
Another key finding in the study showed that the lack of close ties don't stop female bonobos from linking together and supporting one another against the males that cement their social standing.
Good morning. Hundreds of thousands of people are gathering in Rome today for the funeral of Pope Francis.
Yes, an outpouring of love and respect. 250,000 people have visited St. Peter's Basilica to see the pontiff lying in state.
And thousands of people are tightly packed onto the streets of the Vatican City, hoping to capture a glimpse of something that hasn't been seen by anyone alive today. That is the coffin of a pope being processed through the streets of Rome.
Well, hundreds of world leaders, sovereigns and dignitaries arrive in Rome to pay their respect to Pope Francis.
And some breaking news overnight. Virginia Giuffre, who accused Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein of sexual assault, has died, aged just 41.
The Home Office is looking for landlords, not to fix the housing crisis, but to house asylum seekers following that surge of recent crossings.
And on the eve of the London Marathon, we'll be joined by one runner taking part in memory of his famous father to raise funds for Alzheimer's UK.
It's been billed as the biggest fight in British boxing history. Chris Eubank Jr. squares off against Conor in a middleweight clash at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. We'll have build-up throughout the morning.
It may be a cloudy and, for some of us, damp start to the weekend, but sunnier and warmer weather is on the way. I'll have the full details in the forecast coming up soon.
It's just gone 7 o'clock. I'm Stephen Dixon.
I'm Miriam Cates, and this is GB News Breakfast.
Thank you very much for giving time to Amir Shackle 5858. I am Amir Shackle. Have a good life. Bye-bye.